Hello, everyone. Brian Shlonsky here for Wave Now. I am joined by Leland Hulbert, who has been a helper big time for us when it comes to the legal advice in the Crystal Rogers case, as we're getting set here now for the second trial this week. We have got our crews down in Bowling Green in the courtroom, have been there all throughout the day today, working on jury selection for this second trial.
Right. So I've seen some of the notes, and it looks like it's going as planned. The last jury selection was very fast, and it looks like this selection maybe has a few people that have heard more about this trial, which is to be expected because the last one was in Bowling Green. And Bowling Green residents may not have known a lot. You know, it seems like everyone in Nelson County knows, and it's questionable how many people in Bowling Green knew anything a month ago, but now after having a large, high-profile trial there a month ago, it doesn't surprise me that some jurors are mentioning that they have information or they know about the trial.
Started with about 130 potential jurors. They're obviously working to cut that number down. Is that a normal amount to start with, or does that seem like a higher number because they're trying to find people that really don't have a ton of information about this case?
It's probably a little higher number. I thought I read in the notes that they're maybe doing jury questionnaires to see how much pretrial publicity they know about or how much they know about the case. I mean, that's all that they're trying to do is find 12 jurors and 3 alternates, so 15 total, that haven't formed an opinion. So hearing about this case, you know, if someone asked, have you ever heard of the Crystal Rogers case, and they say yes, that doesn't mean they can't be a juror. It's just really the big part is, have they formed an opinion? Are they biased? Are they biased against either side for one reason or another? And jury selection is more about choosing who you don't want as a prosecutor and defense attorney. It's not really choosing who you do want. It's just disqualifying people that aren't appropriate or striking people that you think that are biased against your side.
Being that there are 2 co-defendants in this second trial, do you think, we talked about so much in the Stephen Lawson trial, how fast everything moved and wrapped up in about a week. Being that there's 2 of them, do you think that makes this one last a little bit longer?
I would say, I believe that they may have mentioned that it might be 10 days. That seems more appropriate. I mean, some cases like this are 3, 4, 5 weeks, depending on breaks, depending on number of witnesses. It seems like the attorneys and the judge in this case are pretty efficient based on the last trial. So I'd say 10 days sounds like a pretty good estimate.
We mentioned that we have reporters down there, as we will every day, and they've been sending notes. The notes you're referring to, we can't have cameras in the courtroom, so everything is being handwritten and then sent back to us at the station. Leland helps decipher through some of this as an expert legal analyst on this case. And so one of the things that stood out to us today that Alina Noakes had sent back to us was on the witness list some of the names that have been left off, notably Steve Lawson, who has now been convicted in the first trial. No Nick Houck, no Rosemary Houck. Is that surprising, and could they be added later on?
You can always call a rebuttal witness if a witness testifies and you need to clean up that testimony, or if they testified inconsistently or not truthfully. The judge will ask both sides to name potential witnesses of any sort of conflicts. The conflict here is probably less because you're trying this in another county. But I think it may tip their hat a little bit that they're not going to call those people. Are they still in the mix? Yes. Is Stephen Lawson in the mix? Probably not, but you never know. I mean, you never know what path it's going to take. Either side could feel like it's not going their way and then try to stretch and get different witnesses. So the fact that they're not on there, I think, is telling, but it doesn't ultimately mean you won't see them.
I want to talk about Warren County and the town of Bowling Green, a city, not a tiny town by any means, but to have something like this where there's all of these extra eyes on your community. There are journalists, there are people, lawyers, people coming in from all around the state, potentially if there are nationwide networks like Dateline, for example, covering this. You've got people in the restaurants, in the hotels, out and about in the community. What does that do to an area that maybe isn't used to hosting something like this?
Well, you even heard the judge mention today, I read in the notes that he talked about there's been a lot of pretrial publicity, because of course there has. I mean, we all know that. Do the jurors know that? I don't know. I think Bowling Green is equipped to handle a trial like this because it is big enough to have a large jury pool, and it's far enough away from Nelson County that they're not adjacent. So whenever you move a trial, people always say, well, that we should move the trial, change the venue, there's a conflict, the jurors can't be impartial. It rarely happens. But in this case, it seems like everyone on Nelson County has been dealing with this for 10 years, so they thought it was best to move it. And since you actually have one that was moved, I'm presuming in their calculus they had to come up with a larger city. They couldn't do it, and Kentucky has a lot of small counties. Warren is not one of them. So they're drawing from a pretty large pool, and if they can't find a fair jury and need to expand the pool, they can. I would guess with 135 potential jurors, they're going to be able to pick a jury.
We've been talking a lot about jury selection today, as that's the step that we're in this process so far, trying to get that jury seated. When it comes to the co-defendants themselves, as we look ahead to when the trial actually begins, one of the big surprises maybe out of trial number one was that Stephen Lawson took the stand in his own defense. Do you think that how the verdicts played out with him being found guilty and taking the stand, will that mean the attorneys in this case look at that and say, maybe we don't want to put these co-defendants on the stand? It didn't work out the last time.
Right. I mean, that has to play into their strategy, and I think if their strategy is to put their clients on, which usually it's not, if it is, then maybe it's lowered in the percentage. So if they were 75% going to do it, maybe it's 65 now because they didn't believe, presumably, Stephen Lawson the first time, and the jury kind of lit him up with a higher sentence when it could have been a little bit lower even though he was found guilty. So that typically tells me they didn't buy what he was selling. But I still think you have to take a step back and realize what most attorneys and defendants do is the defendants don't testify. So I was pretty surprised he did in the first trial. I would be surprised if they do in the second.
Anything else that we should be watching for as potential surprise factors as this goes forward? Being that now we've seen one play out, we seem to know these characters so well at this point. Anything that you're looking for is, hey, this could be a surprise, something we should keep our eyes on down the road?
I think the cross-examination is probably going to be more vigorous of these witnesses because you have more attorneys, you have two sets of attorneys, and you also have defense attorneys that know the questions that were asked the first time around. So the prosecution, I would expect it to be more similar to the first trial than the defense, because you have brand new lawyers and lawyers that have now gotten a bite at the apple. So, obviously we can't see that because the trial is not on TV, but I would expect the cross-examination to be more intense, and I would expect the defendants to potentially have some witnesses we don't know about. So, because the defendant, Stephen Lawson, didn't call that many witnesses, he called himself. Mm-hmm. And so do these defense attorneys have some tricks up their sleeve or some different witnesses to call potentially?
On that topic of some of the tricks and some of the things that you don't always expect, we did learn new things about this case with some of the evidence that was brought out in the first trial. Do you think there's another layer to that, or do you believe that at this point, for the media and for legal analysts and for the general public that's been following this case, we kind of know what's happened at this point? Or do you see another shocker around the corner, something like those jail calls that were played in court during Stephen Lawson's trial?
Yeah, so the evidence that could be presented is wide-ranging. I don't have a grasp of what it is other than what it was for the first trial. So are there some jail calls potentially? Are there relatives who said, Brooks Houck or Joseph Lawson told me XYZ on this date 10 years ago? Potentially. Are there statements that could be played by the defendants themselves? Potentially. So, what evidence is going to be used by the prosecution? I would say 80% of what they used in the first trial, and then who knows what else. I mean, it can be a wide range of things. And, the prosecution is generally more open with what they're going to present because they have to turn everything over to the defense. And the defense, if they've done their homework, should be prepared for just about any witness the prosecution could call. It doesn't really work that way the other way. The prosecutor doesn't know who specifically the defendant's going to call, but if the prosecutor knows this case backwards and forwards, they probably have a good idea.
You and I talked about this on one of our newscasts during the first trial. I was shocked that a person who's been arrested, especially for anything tied to a murder, would ever speak about the case on a recorded line in a jail. And there were tons of these calls that were made in that first trial, and I think it's still something that stuck with me as I can't believe somebody would do that.
Yeah, in my profession as, a defense attorney now and a former prosecutor, I'm immune to it because I've seen it so many times. It's shocking how many people talk about their case, even after their attorney tells them not to, even after they're talking to their mom and their mom says, no, don't talk about the case. They blab to their girlfriends, to their parents. I don't know if it's this coming clean, if they're all alone in jail, they have no one else to talk to, but it is shocking how many people talk about their case or violate a court order by talking to a witness, and it's all recorded, and it goes into the more slam dunk material for a prosecutor because you can't refute what you have said without a lot of other evidence.
And when you look at a case like this that's been dragging on for a decade now, that's a lot of potential people, a lot of potential phone calls, a lot of potential conversations that have been had by these defendants. So I guess we'll wait and see what some of that information is that comes out.
Right. I don't know of any other jail calls, but I'm sure there are some. I believe they've been in custody. So you never know what's going to come out in a trial typically, but this one I would expect the template to be there and then new things added.
Last thing I want to ask you during our episode here on Wave Now, as today's been a slower day, again, working on this jury selection, trying to weed out some of these potential jurors. I think I want to talk about the public, how much this case has really been one that people have gravitated towards and paid attention to. There's just some of those stories that tend to stick out with people. I think of Paige Bergfeld in Colorado was also a mother who disappeared. That lingered for over a decade and was a very similar type of case to this one. There was, you think of Gabby Petito, semi-recently was a viral internet star who disappeared. A lot of attention on that case. And you go back even further, Casey Anthony, O.J. Simpson. There's just these cases that for whatever reason the public gravitates towards, and they say this one is of interest. Why this case when you think of all the stories that are out there that are probably similar that happen every single day, but this has been the one that the public has really gravitated towards, the national media has paid attention to, and everybody wants to see what the end result is?
I would say it's just like a murder mystery. I mean, why do people watch murder mysteries? Why do they read novels? Because it's a whodunit. We don't know exactly who did it here. There's no body, and it's 10 years old. So it just builds and builds and builds. I mean, there's other cases of missing people that have gone on for years. I think that, this girl in Bloomington and many other cases, but there's no leads. So here you have a case that went stale for a while and then all of a sudden got reopened and had some traction and now has some trials. So I think the anticipation builds, and it's truly a case of whodunit, and can the prosecution prove that these people did it? And so far they have, at least with Stephen Lawson.
At least in trial number 1. Well, Leland, I appreciate you being here, as always, being one of our legal analysts as we work throughout this now number 2 trial in the Crystal Rogers case. Of course, we'll have our crews down there in Warren County covering this each and every day. We will update you tonight on anything that happens in the courtroom, anything that we may not have discussed here on this set, again on Wave News at 11 tonight. We'll see you there.